Good evening, everyone. My name is Tim. I'm an addict. And now I don't want to recap. I don't want to recap everything I did last week, but I do need to cover an introductory point, which is the overall purpose of Step 11. So if you're coming in at this point, we did a bit of an introduction to Step 11 last time and the evening element. Now, the introductory point is this. The whole programme seeks to put me in a position of being a worker for God, which is unfortunately something of a full-time job. Now, how do you do that if you have a so-called day job? Well, God, as it were, remains my employer the whole time, but I'm seconded, as they might say in HR parlance, to work for particular so-called employers. They're not my employers at all. I don't know who they are, but they send me things to do. I think, that little job they've asked me to do, that's from God. I'm doing that job for God. And then I know it looks like they pay me, but they don't. God pays me, and he pays me by asking them to pay me. So this goes through my whole life. The point about turning my will and life over to God is that it's not mine anymore. It's his. That's what it means to turn it over. Now, what I get back, I don't get my life back. People say, I got my life back since I got clean. I hope not. The last thing I want back is my life. Jesus. I woke up this morning. Well, that in itself was a surprise, but I woke up. Sometimes it's a bit of a rude awakening in the morning to discover you're still here. Anyway, I woke up this morning and I'd gone to bed last night thinking, I can't face the things that are going to be happening on Tuesday. Today being Tuesday. Let alone the more distant future, next week or next year or when I'm 90 or whatever. I can't face it. I thought it's funny because every tomorrow turns into a today. And once it's today, it's fine. And I woke up this morning looking at the thing which had been alarming in prospect the night before, and it seemed absolutely fine. And I had a thought, which wasn't a novel one, but it did strike me, that I'm only ever given courage for today. I'm not given courage for tomorrow. What I'm given is certainty that when we get to tomorrow, or 10 years' time, or 20 years' time, I'll be given the courage for the day on the day in question. But I can't get the courage in advance. So having made a decision to turn my will and life over to God, I can't take my will back. The process is underway, and what I get given back is a day at a time, and the irrevocability of that decision, it's not entirely irrevocable, but imagine a road. We will get to step 11, don't worry. Imagine a road and it has a fork in the road, and there is a left fork, a left prong of the fork, and there is a right prong of the fork. And imagine there is a great ravine between the two, a gully, a canyon, a gulf. So if you go down the left path, you can't cut across to go to the right one. You certainly can't jump back and forth between the two sides. You'd have to go all the way back to the point at which the decision was made and make a new decision. So wheels were set in motion when I took step 3, whether I liked it or not. My life is turned over. I get back a day. Now, it's not, oh, hooray, I've got a day to do whatever I want with, because we've got some instructions. It's given back to me. Guess what? So I can give it back to God. Now, I know it sounds a bit mad, but I didn't make up the rules, I'm just reporting them. So if you don't like them or think they're bizarre, you'll have to talk to the boss upstairs. As I say, I'm just the dinner lady reporting what the book says. So in step 3, I turn my will and life over to God. He doesn't give my life back. He gives me a day back. And as soon as the day starts, listen to what happens. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Now, I think this is rather a low cut on the part of God. You'd think He'd give me half an hour to myself to get my affairs in order, or I know people that play PlayStation in the morning. I don't do that, but I'm not even allowed to do hobbies or run around the playground. On awakening, there's no negotiating with that. First thing in the morning, there's an activity. But it says before we begin the activity, so immediately on awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. Now, there's a lot that can be said about that. How do you ask God to direct your thinking? You might need a pen and piece of paper for this. It's a little bit complicated. You say, God, please direct my thinking. And then how do you ask God to divorce your thinking from self-pity, self-seeking, and dishonest motives? You say, God, please divorce my thinking from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Now, if you can really mean it, it probably doesn't hurt. But God isn't deaf. When God hears that, wheels are set in motion. God's power is not restricted by my lack of complete sincerity in the prayer. These are powerful things. Now, the reason I need to ask God to direct my thinking, and especially ask that it be divorced from self-pity, self-seeking, or dishonest motives, is my mind overnight has eloped with my ego to Vegas and married the three, I don't know if they're sisters or brothers, but nasty little wicked things: self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. I'm committing bigamy overnight with these three little monsters, and every morning I have to be re-divorced. Now, what would happen if one didn't do this? The terrible danger is to think that if one doesn't do this, one's somehow in a neutral position, and unfortunately, there is no neutrality in such situations, and the reason why. Perception and interpretation are the same thing. As soon as I perceive something, I'm interpreting it. It's impossible to perceive things neutrally unless you know what you're looking at. You can't even see. You can look, but you can't see. Now, to interpret, I need a framework. And there are two frameworks. There's the ego framework, which is basically the sum total of my past experiences to perceive what is going on in any situation. This is entirely general and universal. Or there is the God perspective. Now, how God shows me what is true and what is not true, that's a different question. But one must think of it like this. I can't look at anything myself on my own. I'm either using the ego's framework, which is based on the past, or I'm looking through the God lens, being fed my perception of what is going on by God. Now, I can't do anything unless I know what situation I'm in. Imagine you're in a car and you want to move along the road. You need to know which direction the road goes in. You need to know which side of the road you're on. You need to know what other traffic is around, let alone knowing where you're going. In other words, one needs a guide to do anything. To see what is there, one needs a guide. To go anywhere to do anything, one needs a guide. And the two guides available, unfortunately, are the ego and God. Pick one. If I'm not deliberately choosing God, by default, I'm choosing the ego. Not because I'm deliberately trying to do that. That's what happens if you don't put on the God goggles. You'll be seeing through the eyes of the ego. Which is why this is an absolute necessity, and it's not something, the failure to do which will be without consequence. If I don't do it, I'm in trouble because I'm now seeing through the ego's lens. Now, meditation's supposed to be ever so nice. It's supposed to improve how you feel and all of those sorts of things. That's the modern notion. The original notion of meditation when the program was devised was simply concentrated thought. If you happen to have the fortune to be in Al-Anon and you read one day at a time in Al-Anon, the references to meditation in there are also very consistent with that. They're, I think, from the 1950s or possibly early 60s. Before everything went to pot, quite literally. So from the AA perspective and the Al-Anon perspective, meditation is concentrated thought. So what does it ask me to do once I've asked God to direct my thinking? And actually, just note what the divorce is. I'm being divorced essentially from the self-centered perspective. Self-seeking, I want what I want. Self-pity, I haven't got what I want. It's all about wanting. And then dishonesty, trying to get what I want in a dishonest manner, or denying that I even want things, making out that I'm doing things for the good of all when I'm actually doing them for the good of me. So the actual content of the meditation is this, and this is the whole formula. Everything else is add-ons or particular prayers. So meditation and prayer are different activities, or they're little things to add on the end. But the bulk of the how to do step 11 is this, step 11 in the morning. Let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. That is it. I heard someone say at a meeting a while ago, actually I heard someone say, poor old soul, about 20 years ago, said, I can't do meditation because I get restless leg syndrome. And I used to get that, so I understand what it's like. It's a rotten thing to have. I mean, the trick is lots and lots of exercise, that seems to do it. But anyway, leaving that aside. He thought that to do meditation you have to be sitting still and adopting a particular posture, and doing that drove him mad. There's nothing here about posture. There's nothing here about adopting a position. There's nothing wrong with doing this as one's getting ready for work in the morning, walking along the road to the bus stop. It doesn't need a special place. It needs to be done. That's all, just done. Now, when it says we consider our plans for the day, it's a good idea to take this, as one would do with everything else, absolutely at face value. In other words, it's not saying we devise our plans for the day, it says we consider them. This implies we already have them. You can't consider something which isn't already there. If it was saying we're starting with a blank sheet of paper, devising it from scratch, it would say so. So this presupposes that there are plans, and some people operate differently than me, but I have a very settled schedule. So on certain days I do certain things at certain times, and I get up and at a particular time and end up in the office at a particular time and take sponsee calls at a particular time. So 95% of my week is already standard things. A few other things as a day progresses, other things come in, get popped into the schedule. But there's not a lot to really think about in terms of planning for the day. I've got a good structure. One must have a good structure. I remember Doug said to me in the early 90s in AA, which was my only fellowship at the time. I broadened out to other fellowships later. He said, unstructured free time is a disaster for an alcoholic in recovery. And so I have a very structured life. Why? I like the effect it produces. What it produces is stability and order and predictability. It reduces stress. I don't have to think about things, which means I can concentrate my mind on the things that matter. So when I'm considering the plans for the day, I'm literally thinking about what is going on today. How should I approach each of these things? If several tasks have to be juggled, which ones am I going to do first? Which ones am I going to do later? What must I remember not to forget? So I'll have a pen and a piece of paper, not to write down great spiritual truths, but to write down specific things I ought to do. Now, sometimes I have other ideas, and God does seem to give me ideas early in the morning when I'm doing this. Ideas of things to do, things to read, things to listen to, things to write, things to say to whoever. In the A Course in Miracles, which gets a lot of flack, including from me, about being very highfalutin and difficult to read. There are parts of it which are remarkably simple, where it says, basically, you say to God each day, where do I go? What do I do? What do I say? To whom? And so by the end of this period of meditation, I should have a pretty clear idea of what the day is going to hold. I was already fairly clear before I began. Now I'm super clear, and it's all settled in my mind. Now, I'm going to introduce at this point, there are 3 elements of step 11 which are stipulated on pages other than the step 11 pages. And one of them is at the end of A Vision for You, and another one is on page 83, I think. And the last one is about going to God on page 69 when one has a problem. And it says we're to go to God and ask for guidance on each specific matter. And so if I've got a problem, and a problem is either an emotional disturbance or a not knowing what to do, an uncertainty, part of the planning for the day, thinking about the 24 hours ahead, is getting rid of that problem, getting to a solution so that I can go into the day with no problems. Now, this is the point. If I've got something of, I don't know, a little bit of an emotional hangover since the day before, or something happened the day before, or there's an ongoing situation. My friend Damien, for years, would share cryptically and enigmatically at the Friday meeting. He said, I'm going through a situation at the moment. And you'd never find out what the situation was. It was we were on tenterhooks to find out what the answer. Well, we never found out, and it was always so intriguing because there was such a lot of drama. But it was just situation. Whenever one has a situation, one must go to God on it and get a solution straight away. Now, the solution may not be the solution forever. It may not be the whole solution, but although one wouldn't inscribe the solution on tablets of stone, it'll be serviceable for the hour, as Sophia said in a Golden Girls episode. And so I had a situation last year to do with work where I was very troubled, and also there were some practical things to consider. And the solution really was a sequence of solutions extending across 2 months. Each day would bring things to read, things to listen to, things to mention to friends, things to talk about, maybe things to decide. And so that was part of my morning routine, to process the previous day and clear everything out so that I could go into the next day clean. The problem took 2 or 3 months to really work fully out of my system, but every day it got some time, some days an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I do that. When I've got a problem, I don't tolerate it. I do something about it. And sometimes things go within a day. Sometimes, as I say, they can take months to pass, rather like a kidney stone. But one gets those only infrequently. The last time I had one like that was about one as bad as that was about 16 years previously. So, it's all right after a while in recovery. It really is. You don't get too many major hiccups or impediments or obstacles. Anyway, the point is the meditation in the morning is thinking about the day ahead, working out what to do, and the whole while being in God's presence and considering oneself being fed the information, fed the direction along which to think by God. And you get the very strong feeling that you're being guided. It is remarkable. Next bit. It says, under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Now, the clearing one's thinking of wrong motives, I think, has got two elements. First, the sincerity with which one has adopted this program. Secondly, I think the prayer is sufficient, the sincerity plus the prayer. But to go back to the previous point, under these conditions we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. There is an anti-intellectual stream running through certain parts of AA. Now, I don't think the program is intellectual in the sense of being for an elite type of academically trained mind. I don't think it's got anything to do with that. But we are supposed to think. There is a view that we shouldn't be thinking at all. There's nothing to think. There are only things to do. I think that's quite wrong. It hamstrings God if we say, my mind, no point in you hanging out in there, God, there's nothing going on. That's where the business happens. And so I think we are to think things through, but one's thinking things through under the aegis of God, under the supervision and direction of God. And on that line, it says in the 12 and 12 that there's nothing wrong with intellect as long as intellect comes below humility, as long as one knows one's place, which is to have, and it's a dreadful phrase, but it's a useful one. There isn't a simpler way of putting it. There's a phrase, epistemic humility, which means to be humble about what one knows and about the limitations to what one knows. To recognise that there are severe limitations in terms of scope and depth and accuracy of one's own knowledge. As long as one has that humility, thinking is safe. However, I would say with decisions, it's always the vexed question that people always ask about, how do you know it's God's will? Well, it's not by reasoning after the event, because if you're clever, you can argue anything and make it seem plausible. So the decision is to be asked for, and that's the end of it, and one goes through with it. Even if one can't fully understand the rationale, one simply has to trust it. And I'm a firm believer that God is almost codependently interventionist, constantly fiddling around with the smallest of everyday matters. I've had a remarkable thing over the last few days where a job kept trying to get to me last week through an agency. And the job goes through, I won't say what I do, but the job goes through 3 layers. And at layer A, it was offered to me, and I said I didn't have time. Layer B, it was offered to me. I said, ooh, I've got severe misgivings about this. If you pay me per hour, I'll do it. If you pay me per piece, per item, no, because I reckon it could take a long time. They said, no, we haven't got the budget for that. Anyway, it came back to haunt me on yesterday, where they said, person A messed it up. We brought in a reviewer, person B, and they've done something to it, and we think it's better, but we need you to be the fixer, to come in and fix what the fixer did to the broken piece of work. And so it came back to me. It's what I was doing all day, and it's absolutely up my street. I'm so glad, because it's given me an opportunity to be a particular use of this agency. It's a sort of win-win in all sorts of peculiar ways. And last week I was asking God, what shall I do? And the answer kept coming, no, no, set conditions, no. And then it almost looks like there was a plan all along. And this happens again and again and again, where I make decisions and have no idea. Whenever you're making decisions and you have no idea why, buckle up, because there is a reason. I got guided to going to lots of extra Al-Anon meetings, which was, I mean, I love Al-Anon in a way, but a meeting a day is a lot. With all the knitting and all the things that go on in Al-Anon. The surveillance. And then a few months later, when my Al-Anon program was buffed up, I encountered a situation in my life for which I was now fully prepared, because I've been going to Al-Anon every day for months. I mean, I've been in Al-Anon for years, but I drifted from the meetings. I still use the literature, but I needed a refresher course. God knew what was coming and I didn't. So when God said, go to this Al-Anon meeting every day, I said, okie dokie, and I just went. I didn't try to second guess it. Second guessing is a complete disaster. Because what would you base it on? What do you think you know? You know nothing. I know nothing. Almost nothing. Now, one thinks in the preparation phase, because that's the preparation for the receipt of the decision. But when the decision comes, that's the end of it. Now, next little bit is all about, so that what that paragraph was how to start the meditation and the basic content of the meditation. Next paragraph is what happens when things go wrong. So in thinking about our day, we may face indecision. That's not knowing what to do, where to go, what to say to whom. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here, we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought, or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. So when I'm looking for an answer, if I get no answer is the answer. God's saying, back off, go and do something else. Note the three channels: inspiration, spirit, intuitive thought, mind, decision, body, because decisions are about things to do in the material world. So the three levels of the spiritual, the mental, and the material. Note how on page 64, it says when we straighten out spiritually, we straighten out mentally and then physically. So with the program, the spiritual comes first, the mental comes second, the physical comes third. And this runs through the program like Brighton through a stick of Brighton rock. The one point, obviously, is one has to be physically detoxed, but we're talking about the broad sweep by which one gets well. One gets well by getting the important thing, which is the relationship with God, sorted out first, and then everything else flows through. When I was a teenager, I was a musician. And at the school I went to, this will tell you something about the school. They brought in an Alexander technique teacher for the pianists, because a lot of us were having, it was a sort of semi-specialist music school. Lots of us were having trouble with joints and aches and pains and things. And one of the things she explained was if you had a marionette, one of those wooden marionettes with little strings which connect all of the pieces which represent the limbs and the various bones. If you held the marionette by the head, and let the rest of the marionette just drop, the whole thing would just relax completely. And she said, this is what you need to learn to do with Alexander technique. If you get the head and the neck right, the rest of your body will fall naturally beneath those. If the head and the neck is wrong, good luck with everything else. And it's like that with the program. If I get the basic relationship with God right, which is God is in charge of literally everything, including what I believe, what I think, and what I do, and I surrender and then submit to that, then everything else sorts itself out. If that isn't done, then nothing will be sorted out, however well I seem to manage. Relaxing and taking it easy. I'm a little bit of a worrier, just a couple of times a year. That's an understatement. And the thing that I forget when I worry is that God's in charge of everything. I will look at something going on in the world and say, I need to worry about that because God hasn't noticed it. God doesn't know it's happening, but I'm paying attention. This is the Al-Anon megalomania of thinking that one has to play God's role because God's too stupid to notice what is going on, or is absent, or something, or for whatever, or doesn't care. So I have to because God doesn't. That needs to be undone. I need to say, God knows everything that is going on. God is working through billions of people on the planet to achieve his aim. And that's the end of it. I'm asked to accept that, not to understand it. There are an awful lot of things that I can use reason to understand. And I read a lot. I read books a week, plural. And I think that's a good thing. But the one thing I don't try to understand is how God is operating. I'm simply trying to learn through experience what that might look like in my life, but I can't get behind, let's say, looking at world events or the course of history or trends in society and try to work out what God's plan is or how God is going to solve those. One can't ask that. It's so beyond the individual's capability. Next element, I think this is part of the same paragraph, but at the top of 87. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration. Oh, by the way, inspiration, intuitive thought, or a decision, the ego uses those channels too. So just because, I don't know if anyone remembers the Sainsbury's on the Finchley Road. I think it's been knocked down or turned into something else. Where in the 70s and the 80s they had these vacuum tubes, so that the people at the tills would wrap up the money in little pods, pop them in the vacuum tubes and go and disappear up, and then other tubes would come down. It's the only Sainsbury's I'd seen it in. Maybe it was a flagship. Anyway, I think of the inspiration, the intuitive thought, and the decision like those vacuum tubes, which little pods come down, you crack open the pod, you unfurl the piece of paper, and there's a message. Now, just because it's come down one of those tubes doesn't mean it's come from God, because the ego uses the same tubes. So you can't tell the origin by the channel, which is a very important thing in discerning God's will. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the dreaded, it's one of the most deadly phrases in recovery. If ever you catch yourself saying it, then beware. And it's this: when someone says, I've just had a massive realization. Because it's always accompanied by the certainty of its truth. I don't know why, if I suddenly realise something, it should be any more true than anything else, than what a mad person on the bus is saying to me. But you see people acting on massive realisations the whole time. The massive realisation could be from God, could be from the ego. The very fact it's a massive realisation is no indication as to the helpfulness, truth, or any other aspect of its quality. Anyway, what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. In other words, this becomes how one lives generally. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, especially in group conscience meetings, that's when the massive realization usually strikes people. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely on it. Now, Bill W. in the 12 and 12 talks about the disconcerting individual who claims he relies on God for all of his ideas and direction. And when questioned about the idea or the direction, he says, well, God told me. Now, that is disconcerting, but no more disconcerting than someone that says, I've been thinking about this day in and day out for months, and I've decided to tell you what I really think about you, because it might help others if you shape up. That's just as disconcerting as someone that relies on God. I'd rather take the risk of trusting someone that's relying on God, as long as they're not a complete idiot, than trust someone that's been sitting in a dark hole thinking about things, for months on end until 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, of course, one has all sorts of so-called checks and balances in place. If one is sincere about the whole package deal of prayer, meditation, self-examination, one talks to people, one narrates one's day, which produces feedback simply in the form of people's responses and reactions. They don't have to come and say, I'm just going to give you some feedback on that. They don't need to do that. Just their very reaction will tell you when you're full of shit. It doesn't need to be heavy-handed. There are so many ways that you can have checks and balances. I think one can really trust this. Now, the great check or balance is this. I heard someone say, the worst it can be is a terrible mistake. If it is, admit it promptly. And then Yogi Berra saying, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. You've got to go one way or the other. So go one way and see. Often you have to try something to see anyway, and you couldn't have known it was wrong. I went for 6 months down a particular course which would have been very life-changing. It would have involved moving city and leaving my work to go and study something to get a particular qualification. I won't say what it was. I had to be 6 months into it to realise, bad idea. So I didn't sit around musing about it. I just got to a fork in the road and I took it. And then eventually it turned out to be wrong. But it was right to have gone through that 6-month process, because there's no other way I could have learnt that was the wrong path. You couldn't have explained it. And everyone thought it was a good idea as well. That was what was interesting. So, there is the question of the role of the sponsor. There have been times when I've allowed myself to be overridden by a sponsor, and it turned out to be right. There are times I've refused to be overridden by a sponsor, and that turned out to be right as well. Now, the longer I go, the more likely it is that I can be trusted with my own basic daily decision making, and I was saved from numerous catastrophes in my first year. Until one's got one's marbles back, maybe keep it real there, keep it simple, don't make big changes. If you have a big change, ask a grown-up. But one should, over time, develop the ability to rely on God and the ordinary basic networks. My friend Anthony describes a meeting in Manhattan. I don't mean to have a go at New York, I often do, but anyway, this happened to be in Manhattan. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, though, isn't it? It's such an easy target. They say the same about us, I'm sure. He was at a meeting in Manhattan, and someone went to a chap and said, "Could you take the meeting this evening? Sally's away at her special clinic or something, so can you take the meeting?" And the bloke said, "Okay, but I'm just going to go and ask my sponsor first." And the chap was 20 years sober, and he went and said, "Bob, can I take the meeting today?" And Bob said, "I think that's a very good idea." And he went and took the meeting. I think I'd be a bit embarrassed. I'd be more embarrassed being the sponsor in that situation than the sponsee. I don't think that's ideal. Maybe the two people in question, that's how they needed to work things out. But for me, that wouldn't be healthy. God reliance really does mean God reliance, not people reliance. One thing I would say, however, you can't judge things by majorities and minorities. There are arguments both ways, which I won't go into. So even if you're in a small minority on a question, particularly with regard to your own life, doesn't mean you're wrong. A friend of mine says, with some of the major decisions he's made in his life, people queued up round the block to tell him he was wrong, but he went ahead anyway, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. Charles Haddon Spurgeon was a very wordy 19th century. I think he was Irish in origin. I may be wrong on that, but he certainly preached in London and was very famous for his inordinately long Sunday sermons, which are a really marvellous read. They're hilarious at times. Some are very sentimental and flowery, and others are very punchy. That he's good. But he talks about the danger of insisting that God can only speak to you through a crack in your ceiling. So you stop up all of the doors and the windows, you brick everything up so no one can get in, because that single channel to God through your roof is enough. I think if one has the right balance of enough people one is talking to and God, that works. Just people, bad idea. Just God, bad idea. But ultimately, in those two, it is God who has the casting vote. Next paragraph. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be. So that at the end of the meditation, I say, "God, all through the day, show me what my next step is to be." That we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. Again, you turn that into a prayer using those words. We ask especially for freedom from self-will, another mandatory part. Everything up to this point is mandatory in step 11. And are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. Now, of course, one doesn't ask for outcomes. One asks for guidance on how to handle situations, and at a pinch, one can ask for something to be resolved, but not for a particular resolution. And if you add on the caveat in order that one can demonstrate to others how successful God is at solving problems, then that covers you. But honestly, I find it best to just stick to what it says in the actual headline of step 11, praying only for knowledge of His will for me and the power to carry that out. So this is the prayer paragraph. So previous two paragraphs of meditation, this is the prayer paragraph. And there aren't many prayers. Now, the other extra prayers to bring in, page 83, we pray for patience, tolerance, kindness, and love in all those situations which command that response, which is really any situation where I'm liable to be unpleasant or cold. And the other one is from 163 or 164. We ask God in our morning meditation what we can do for the person who still suffers. So that's where you tuck in those other prayers from other bits in the book. And if one needs to pray about certain matters, this is where that prayer would come in. Now, the next paragraph is what I might call the bolt-on paragraph. So it gives you all sorts of extra little things you might do if they help. If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. I go to an online morning meditation meeting, 7 a.m. every day, 20 minutes. I go 5 times a week. For technical reasons at the weekend, I don't go. But I do that 5 days a week. I find that enormously beneficial. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. I've done that, sometimes for up to 45 minutes a day. I go through phases when that seems like it's the thing which is the most important thing in my life. I go through phases I just can't even do it. At the moment, can't even do it. But this is the bolt-on paragraph. These are the optional extras. If they help, do them. If they don't help, don't do them. But don't worry about them. You can get full marks, 100%, even without doing anything in this paragraph, because these are the extras. And also, these mustn't be done instead of. What comes before this point is the meat and the potatoes of the step 11. This other stuff here is like the little these are the after dinner mints, or as they say in French before gourmet meals, the amuse-bouche, the sort of little mouth tickler, the little tiny little morsel that you have before the meal. It's not the meal. And one can get into frightful trouble substituting these bolt-ons for the meal itself. And there's nothing obviously wrong with religion, but if one does it, it mustn't take the place of this direct asking for God's will. One can go to religious services for years and literally hear nothing about the practice of asking God directly what one should do in one's day. There are denominations where that will be, and practices and communities where they'll do that, but in my experience, it's rare. They're very different things we're doing. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we've been discussing. Note the constraint there. A few set prayers which emphasize the principles we've been discussing. Any others, of course, you knock yourself out. Say prayers all day long. What are the principles? The principles: surrender to God, trusting God, reliance on God, God's care and direction. Lots of the Psalms I found lend themselves very well to this. 18, 27, 91. Read the Emmett Fox commentaries on these. Those will be immensely helpful. I eliminated anxiety entirely from my life by using Psalm 91 systematically for a period of 6 months. And it hasn't come back. And it had been there for decades. So that's God 1, the world 0. So that worked. Thank you, Emmett Fox. There are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Just one thing on the prayers. I know people that say immensely long prayers, and they've got them immense. I know someone that memorised Psalm 119, which, as you know, is the one which sort of goes on for page after page after page after page after page. I can't do that. I can only deal with short. And I'm better off with a single short prayer, which I just say over and over and over, which is why the rosary I find very helpful. So it's okay to find your own way. You don't need to feel guilty if you don't like very, very long prayers. You're not further behind. It's simply a matter of taste. So these books, be quick to see where religious people are right, make use of what they offer. There are as many traps in step 11 as there are in the ego. There are as many ways to get it radically wrong as there are life itself. And one of them is the use of other books and other materials, and I've fallen into this trap. My current practice, and I've been settled in this for a while, so I'm pretty confident, is that the purpose of using other books is to amplify the ideas of the program, not to set up competing structures or philosophies or ways of looking at things or sets of practices. I'm very much a believer in what Paul Martin said, which is that the program is sufficient and that's the end of it. And other things are there to bolster and amplify and colour in, like a sort of painting by numbers where you can colour in the little squares, but you need to stick to the picture. You can do little variations, and there are matters of taste in spiritual matters, and that's where those books come in handy. But I've got into terrible trouble when I use the other books as alternative systems. I get lost. And it makes it very difficult because then in AA or whatever the fellowship is, you're in the position of trying to pass on a program which is half the program and half other things. And I use other things, but as I say, they're there to bolster, they're not to replace or be substitutes for the program. And also, sometimes people get very lost in exploring various spiritual paths and spiritual programs and systems, particularly ones with workbooks, because those are the ones that lend themselves most to this. And the danger is the unconscious effect that has is to reinforce the notion that the program doesn't work and the program isn't enough. And I'm so advanced with my complicated psychological problems, I need something more. And there's a danger in that. It's not that other ideas and practices and whatever are not useful, but as Bob Darrell would say, they're in addition to, not instead of. And the last bit of step 11, and so Alice, I think we can start having questions come through because this is the final stretch now. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. That means any kind of emotional upset or not knowing what to do, and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show, which really suggests that when I'm agitated, I'm running the show again. In other words, I've got notions of how things should be, and that's why I'm upset. We constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, "Thy will be done." Am I working the program? Is a question one might ask oneself. We're back to the mandatory stuff here. So the bolt-on paragraph was the previous one. This is the mandatory one. I can only say I'm working the program today if I've said to myself, said to God, "Thy will be done," many times that day. If it hasn't been said many times, I haven't been doing that bit of the program. The program is not something, it's not theoretical. Either I'm doing it or I'm not. And whether I'm doing it is a question of fact, of am I literally taking the actions asked? And it's really annoying. Sometimes you get to 9 o'clock in the morning, you realise you haven't asked God to direct your thinking, so you go, "Okay, sorry, God, please direct my thinking." It looks mechanical, it looks as though you're doing it out of form, but I think it's important because that's how slipping starts. It starts by cutting corners and then discounting it as though it doesn't matter. These things do matter. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. It's interesting that excitement heads the list of dangers, because when I'm excited, I'm full of my own ideas, and that's dangerous. Now, I may have mentioned this before, in the translation into French of the big book, certainly the version I've got, I don't know if it was so-called a Metropolitan French translation or a Canadian French translation, but anyway, in that little passage, because I'm sponsoring someone in French at the moment, so we're going through the book in French. And when we got to that little bit, we noticed that the word excitement had been missed out of that list in the translation into French, as though the translator into French said, I simply do not see what is wrong with excitement. Excitement is perfectly normal. Why are these English people telling me not to be excited? Typical English Americans, they have no emotion. We French, we have emotions. So excitement is absolutely fine. We'll just get rid of that. No one will notice. Oh, but we did notice. We did notice. So if you're French, you have to add that one in manually. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works, it really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we've just outlined. Now, as with many other parts of the book, whenever there's a promise, if you're not in the state described by the promise, you can diagnose what you're doing wrong by simply going back a few words and saying, what condition haven't I met? And so if I'm tired, it's never because of the amount of things I'm doing. It's because of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, and foolish decisions. Because according to the book, that's going to make you tired. So all the way through, the promises, they can be used to work backwards to the source of the problem. So that's the formal bit done, and we've got some questions here. Is step 11 teaching us how to hear God's will, or how to quiet the ego enough to stop mistaking our own will for it? I think, well, what is it trying to teach us to do? The outcome of step 11, the output, is a list of things to do today and a notion of how to go about them, what spirit to go to different people in, what to mention, what not to mention. It's very concrete. It's very specific. Now, the thing is about the mind. Remember the Finchley Road Sainsbury's with vacuum tubes? Everyone's got those 3 vacuum tubes of inspiration, intuitive thought, and a decision. The wickedest person in the universe has got the same vacuum tubes installed, and stuff is coming down those vacuum tubes the whole time with him, as it is with everyone else. Those 3 channels of inspiration, intuitive thought, and decision are constantly active. I don't need to do anything special to listen, because the tube does the thing for me. Thoughts come to me. I don't need to do anything to make a thought come to me or to prepare myself. Either something comes into my consciousness or it doesn't. I'm not the agent which causes the thought to come into my consciousness down those tubes. What step 11 is doing is it's asking me to adopt the position of seeking God's will, and then to do a certain number of simple things, considering my plans for the day with the purpose of discerning God's will. My job is on the petitionary side of the bargain and the concentration side of the bargain. I concentrate on the tasks of the day, the plans, the things that are going to happen, the situations I'm going to find myself in. I say, is there anything else that I need to be adding to the day? Other things that I ought to consider, people that ought to be a concern of mine. But I will hear. I don't think one can not hear. In the same way that when there's a knock on the door or there's a phone that rings, I don't need to do anything to prepare myself to hear the ring of a phone. I'm going to say something quite heretical. and I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone say this, but it's true for me. I don't need to be quiet to hear. To hear. I can have a lot going on, and intrusive thoughts shoot into my mind. The point is not to shut down my mind. The point is to sincerely want to know what God's will is. And if I sincerely want to do the right thing, God's will intrudes all by itself. God is not going to be frustrated here. If God wants to tell me something, he'll tell me. And quite often in a way that I'm not looking for and I'm not inviting, just happens. Now, one thing I didn't say, which is very important, you do all this special asking in the morning, but this is for the whole day. So the answers actually come to me throughout the whole day. Some might come during this period of meditation, but then they come all through the day. Suddenly, I behaved badly yesterday, not off the scale, but not great either. And it was just really clear afterwards. The thought came to me. I was busy working, and the thought went boom, hit me on the side of the head. I didn't get myself into a special physical condition or special condition of quietness. I was doing something entirely different. And then the thought hit me. You need to sort this out. So I spoke to someone, and also I went and spoke in a friendly, cheerful, ordinary way to the person that he and I had a I think what they say in political circles is a frank and fair exchange of views on something. It wasn't an argument, but it was a frank and fair exchange of views. If you're American, that's British for a very tense conversation. That's what that means. And I needed to make clear to him that I thought he was doing a good job and it was fine and we're friends and it's great. The other points that had been made notwithstanding, I didn't have any personal beef against him. And at the end of the conversation, we were both clear and it was nice. And we were very friendly today and we chatted and it's all fine. But it's a perfect example. If God wants to speak to me, he'll do it. Doesn't need special preparation by me. It just needs the basic tasks here. Is the nightly review considered step 10 or 11? The nightly review, this is a great method for working out what step anything is. If you follow an instruction in the book, or you find an idea in the book, the step it's part of can be identified by saying which bit of the book is it in. So if you sit down and write a resentment inventory and write names and causes and this affects you can think you're doing step 11, but you're not. You're following step 4 instructions, so you're doing step 4. The nightly review is in the step 11 bit of the big book, so it's step 11. It's simply a fact of where in the book it falls. And the same applies with all of the stuff about the failure of self-will. Is not part of step 1 and unmanageability, as sometimes it gets brought into there. That's not where it lies in the book, it lies in step 3. I think it's best to just, in order to have an international language of people who use the big book, if that simple principle is followed, what step is it? Well, on what page is it discussed? Where does that fall in the book? That just solves the question. The thing is about the steps in terms of page 59 and the summary that you get there on 59 to 16 on the wall scrolls, that's just to help us roughly talk about the steps. But the steps are all intertwined into each other. You can't really separate them out cleanly. So you don't need to. It's allowed to be a bit of a mess, and that's absolutely fine. Suggestions of books to amplify the program, and the person is thinking bedtime reading. I'm just going to mention a few things which happen to have helped me. This is not a recommendation, but it's just things which have helped me. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. It's kind of entry level, how not to sabotage your own life through constant negative thinking. And that's the big thing when people are new in recovery. Hot on the heels of that comes everything by Emmett Fox. There's a Buddhist writer called Charlotte Yoko Beck, Joko Beck, with a J, I think. Charlotte Joko Beck. Amazing. I learnt so much from her in my first couple of years. If you haven't read the Al-Anon book, One Day at a Time in Al-Anon, get it. It doesn't matter if you have to how you get it. It can be difficult to get sometimes, but just get a copy and read it, and have it as your bedtime, a bedside book. Read it every morning. Read it every night. It's amazing. In order to amplify the ideas on pages 60 to 62 of the big book about the failure of the world, the failure of Western civilization to solve people's existential discomfort, Anthony de Mello, but that's really pages 60 to 62. Materialism doesn't work. And the complete works of Anthony de Mello are very helpful with that. But they're also very helpful with separating out in step 4 what's other people's crap and what's mine. My crap is my beliefs, my thinking, my behaviour, all of my internal programming. That's his other big contribution. He amplifies that brilliantly. C.S. Lewis is by a long chalk the most influential writer that I've read on any spiritual matters. And the ideas which people struggle with in We Agnostics, Bill does an amazing job in 14 pages to condense thousands of years of theology into a bite-sized chunk for people that still smell of gin. So when people criticise it, when they think of the magnitude of what he's trying to do there, the temerity to criticise one word of that chapter, you write something which is better then. I'd love to see it. Now, the ideas in there can be difficult to get your head round, but that's because of the difficulty of the subject matter, particularly if you haven't been brought up in any kind of religious or spiritual tradition. And in fact, if you've been thoroughly indoctrinated by a contemporary educational system to think of religion and spirituality with utter contempt, there's quite a lot of unpacking that needs to take place of that before you can even get at the material. I have a lot of sympathy with that because that was my predicament. C.S. Lewis will give you plenty to think about for 5 years. Read everything he wrote twice, including the short stories and the novels and everything, the children's novels. The stuff on English literature, don't worry about that specialist stuff, but all of his sort of lay theology and his fiction, even his letters, are very helpful, and they'll make enormous sense of bits of the programme. The Course in Miracles is an acquired taste, and I would leave that until you're doing pretty okay after a few years. Get all the AA stuff, CA stuff, Al-Anon stuff, just motoring along nicely. If you're going to do the Course in Miracles, best to do it with a teacher, and the best teachers, or not necessarily an actual live class, but Earl Purdy, Purdy. Of course, none of this is conference approved, but whatever, you understand that. Earl Purdy on YouTube is brilliant. Ken Wapnick, Wapnick, was the editor of the Course in Miracles. It was ascribed, as she put it, by Helen Schuckman, and that's also incredibly influential. But I've seen people go a bit funny on it, so you want to watch yourself with that. You won't go terribly far wrong with Norman Vincent Peale. Ernest Holmes I found marginally useful, but some people swear by him. and I suppose there are other people as well. But I think those are the main ones, which are the perennial ones I return to. Oswald Chambers is very good, but again, advanced. Give it 5 to 10 years. Unless you're very religious and very austere and have at least 3 Scottish grandparents, don't even consider Oswald Chambers. He's very depressing. But if you're already depressed, it might actually give you a lift because he's a little bit further ahead than you. But he was writing in the middle of the First World War, which wasn't, the most cheerful time. So it's like, Augustine writing as the plumbing in the Roman Empire is collapsing, which is going to, make you depressed about human beings, as a friend of mine says. So those are the main ones. I find working with very religious people difficult, or people who think they're very religious. Is there anything else I can do to reassure them that the suggested Step 11 instructions are not in conflict with their religious beliefs and practices? Keep the two entirely separate. I've been to Israel a number of times to do workshops, and I've had a very good time doing those, and met all sorts of people from all sorts of different religious backgrounds: Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, and what's interesting about the place is there are an awful lot of people in recovery in various different fellowships, less AA, but more some of the other fellowships. But often these are people who, especially the ultra-Orthodox, have spent their whole lives. There are people who are in yeshiva who have to join recovery to form a relationship with God to tackle their addiction. These can be almost separate questions. The question of your personal relationship with God and the religious practices. So there's nothing in AA that says don't do the religious practices. I've never encountered someone who says in their religion you can't ask God what to do today. Maybe there are sects where one's not supposed to do that. I've never come across that. I've never come across anyone who has said this prayer goes against what I've been taught in my religion, in terms of not being allowed to say the prayer. Sometimes people come up with theological objections, but that's that's a different thing. Unless they're a theologian, people often have very distorted ideas of what their religion is telling them. But I don't tend to get involved in that. I just say, if you want what we've got, you do what we do. This is what we do. Over to you, your choice. That's the quickest way round it, and it's the same with any other kinds of objections. Someone said, I may have missed it, but when asking friends, family to join us in morning meditation, are there any helpful structures or frameworks to use? Similar to a meditation meeting of sharing after a period of silence. I don't know. The only time I've ever done it is this morning meditation meeting that I currently do. In the past, I've gone to morning religious services. And in the quiet bits, I do my little Step 11-y things. I've done that, but I have no experience of trying to do that. If I suggested morning meditation to Jonathan, who's in the kitchen right now, you should. I can just imagine the look on his face. I'm not going to go down that path. Let's see what else we've got. I think for now, Alice, that may be all. Let me just look through the other questions. Oh, here we go. Regarding the proper order of morning tasks for Step 11. Yes. Number 1, God please direct my thinking. Number 2, divorce my thinking from self-pity, self-seeking and dishonest motives. And then go into the thinking about the day. There's one other thing I would say. And I know I give certain forms of meditation a very hard time, and I shouldn't really do that. Uh, I've, for a lot of years, used forms of Eastern meditation, not as part of my step 11, but because um, they've helped me stop going mad because of an overactive brain. And I've used Insight Timer, I've used Eastern meditation books to adopt particular practices. Now, I don't consider this to be part of my step 11, but there have been times when I'm like a box of frogs and I need to calm down just a touch before I do the step 11. And that's where that can come in. I think all of those other meditation techniques are wonderful in themselves, and they can be used to help with step 11 because they can put one in a more able to concentrate. I think one can always hear God, but it's can one concentrate on the task at hand? That's a different question. And sometimes if I do that form of meditation, especially using Insight Timer with all those special sounds which are literally designed to calm the mind of people with ADHD brain. I screen very, very highly on ADHD screening questionnaires. Insight Timer is amazing. And the other thing as well, it talks about our thinking being raised to a higher plane. I've gone through long phases of, before I do the step 11 in the morning, thinking about, not thinking about, before I get to the thinking bit, listening, sometimes for half an hour, to classes, to lectures, to talks, to motivational things by religious people, to get me in the mood for it, to lift me up out of the material, so that when I'm looking at the material, I'm looking from the realm of the spirit down into it. I'm not tied up in all of the mud. And I'm going to make one final suggestion, then I'm done, Alice, and then you can go and have your dinner. Now, the next suggestion won't go down well with everyone, but Joyce Meyer, the podcast where she does this half-hour video every day, and I find it difficult not to listen to that and be full of joy and enthusiasm about God, and I'm not of the same denomination at all. But she's so confident that God can help, and that's really helpful. You ask AI, does God exist? Very interesting answers. Good luck to you. But you listen to her, and you're like, oh my God, God does exist. That's really helpful. I'd forgotten that. So try it, it might help. So there we go, Alice. That's me. I'm done.